friends, my name is Angie, Angela, whatever you'd like to call me, and I'm coming to you from Western Australia. If you're new here, welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk all about books, share the books I'm reading, the books I want to read, everything about books. And if you've been here for a while, thank you so much for coming back again. Today I'm rounding up the books that I read in May, which is a considerable mixed bag. If you've been here for a while, you know that I tend to read most genres, and this month was most definitely a mixed bag. I have some speculative fiction, contemporary fiction, literary, some memoirs, a little bit of sci-fi, but I think I'm most especially pleased this month that of the books that I read this month, which there were 7, 4 of them were on my TBR, and they had been on there for quite a while, like we're talking months, if not last year I had them on there. So I'm very pleased to be starting to whittle that down, because I have over 100 books on my physical TBR, and I really want to get that down to a manageable 50. That's kind of my goal. I don't want to go beyond that as a general rule. And actually there's a couple of Instagrammers, they're these, I think their name is Festival Mavens, and they're 2 readers, one is in Perth and one is on the East Coast, maybe Melbourne or Sydney. And one of these readers has what she calls her TBR box. And so she has just one box, and she is not allowed to bring any more books into her home if they do not fit into that box. So I thought that was a really interesting idea. I would love to be able to be that strict and say, I've got 2 shelves, no more than 2 shelves on my bookshelf at any time, but you know how life goes. In my most recent bookish chat with you, I shared my rating system for books, which is not very scientific, but I also shared that I was feeling quite distracted with my reading. I was starting books and not wanting to finish them. I would get halfway through, a quarter through, be enjoying it, but then be like, I'm just not invested in finding out the ending of this story. And it's not that the book was bad. It's not that I wanted to not finish the book. I was just really distracted. And I think it's just this short attention span problem that a lot of us have when it comes to our consumption of social media or the way that we get things. There's just these small little sound bites. So when it comes that we need to dedicate 5 hours or 6 hours to a book over a period of time, I feel like I was getting a little bit weary from it. And so for that reason, I've actually taken the drastic step this month where I have deleted all the social media from my phone. If I want to access social media, I have to do it from my computer. And I just really want to avoid it. I want to avoid going down that hole of doom scrolling, which is just, it serves no purpose whatsoever. So I've done that for this just recently, and I'm hoping that that will help my attention span as an overall goal. But when I shared that video with you and I said I was feeling really unfocused and I had so many books on the go, what I did to combat that was I had a good look at the books I was reading and which 2 or 3 I really would like to finish. And the other books I just put on pause. I just put them to the side and said, don't even think about reading these. Let's focus on these 2 or 3. And then when I finished one, I would not add any more into the mix. I would read the next one. And that made life a lot easier. Rather than having 7 books to choose from, I could choose from just 2 and see which one I wanted to pick up. But it did kind of make me think about something I saw Kim from Middle of the Book March talk about a while ago, which is that she felt she was becoming more monogamous with books rather than having a number on the go at the same time. And I feel like I might be going in that direction. At the very least, it might be that I have a non-fiction and a fiction on the go at the same time, rather than a literary fiction, contemporary fiction, memoir, non-fiction, something edifying, rather than having too many categories. I think I might be leaning in that direction. So that said, the books that I started reading and have not yet finished is the Iliad. I am maybe a third of the way through, and I definitely want to finish that by the end of June. I also put on hold The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis and A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So let's get into the books that I actually read. As usual, my pile is not organised. So firstly, a book that I did finish in May, which I can't talk about just yet because I read this as a buddy read, is Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens by Shankari, Chandran. And I shared this with you in my bookish catch-up recently. It is a book that won the Miles Franklin Award in 2023. It is a beautiful book, and I cannot wait to share all my thoughts about it. But that was one that I finished this month. I finished The Whale's Last Song. I came across this book in a bookstore and it was completely buying a book based on its cover. And I'm not mad that I did that because it turned out to be a really beautiful book. It's probably best described as a lyrical fable, which has themes like family secrets, finding your place in the world, learning your history and how that shapes you as a person, along with the things that we do for the people we love. That was a really strong theme in this book. And it really does read like a fairy tale. I think in the synopsis it's described as The Little Prince Meets the Alchemist, and I have to agree with that. This was such a beautiful read, a beautiful fairy tale for adults, because while it's written like a children's story, it has so much wisdom in there for adults. So the whale's last song starts in the middle of a terrible pandemic. It is, I guess, like the plague or the flu going around. And a young girl named Tio leaves her family home in search of a cure for her sister who has this disease. Tio's father has surrendered himself to the evil Marquis, who is asking for people to donate their bodies to be experimented on for the greater good to find a cure for this disease. And so Tio's father does this in the hopes that he will receive a lot of money and that money will go to his daughters. So while Tio goes on her journey, she disappears further and further and deeper into the forest with her companion, her goat named Isabel, and she experiences and meets so many creatures and beings and teachers who hold the answers about who she is. There are a number of questions that she has not ever had answered. Meanwhile, there is a parallel story from the whale who is coming back to the place of its birth to die. It's come to the end of its life. And this whale also holds some secrets in this jigsaw that is Tio's story. The writing is incredibly lyrical and poetic and very unique, and I really found in particular the writing of the whale from the whale's perspective and the whale fall was so haunting and really, really beautiful. There is a really interesting author's note at the back of this book where the author explains where this story came from, why she started writing this story and how it came to be, and I found that really interesting to read after. So if you do read this book, I encourage you to read that author's note. I think for me, the downsides to this book were that I didn't feel that I really bonded with the characters. I wish there was more of a narrative from the whale. I think there was only a few pieces from the whale's perspective and it was just so beautiful. I wish there was more. But even saying that, I finished this book feeling like I learned something from each of the characters' journeys, and it really is quite an allegorical kind of book in that sense. It would be hard to put this book down and not feel changed in a way, softer or more hopeful. There is something magical about it. And I would recommend it to people who like cozy fantasy, people who are tender souls and they have a kinship with the natural world. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I'd probably recommend it to specific people that like those things. The next book I read was Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession. I came across this book in a bookstore after I had read a comment from someone who was recommending it. And it came about because I was talking how I wanted to read gentle books. I wanted to focus my time this year on books that were really nourishing for the soul. Leonard and Hungry Paul are 2 guys in their 30s. They still live in their childhood homes and they meet weekly to play board games. They are not what you would call go-getters, but in this story, which is very slight, they are thrown a few curveballs, which makes them come out of their comfort zones. But all the while they go through these challenges and they still remain true to who they are, which is just a couple of nerds who are kind to each other and other people and enjoy their lifestyles, even though they are lifestyles that a lot of other people would not aspire to because they aren't seen as successful. I think the author did a great job of bringing a little humour into this without making it at the expense of the characters who are very literal at times, such as the preamble when Leonard is getting ready for his first date with this woman named Shelley, or when Paul tries to return a box of chocolates to the supermarket. These were some really interesting or really funny moments in the story that I love. It has its faults. I felt like Paul's parents were a little bit too perfect, and there were moments when Paul had quite a few monologues and it didn't feel fitting with the character. But so there's just a couple of faults. But overall, I think I like this book for the same reason why I liked the TV show Kath and Kim. Even though the tone and the setting is very different, these are just people who are loyal to their lives, loyal to each other, they are kind, they are giving, and they both kind of fly in the face of what our traditional aspirations are of success. They have a different version of success, and that could be just sitting down at the end of a day and having a cheese plate with your friend. It doesn't have to be a really big moment. They both fly in the face of traditional aspirations of success, where what one person's version of success may be having hundreds of friends and going out every night and having a lot of money. For these people, it's simply just meeting on regular occasion to play a board game because that's what they like. Leonard and Hungry Paul live quietly and contentedly and resist those pressures that society might put onto them. In both of those examples, there's a bit of a critique around a culture that is telling us that we have to be extraordinary to be happy and to succeed in life. But Leonard and Paul show us that there is value in being ordinary and choosing peace over progress and embracing life as it is rather than continually striving for it to be something else. I gave this book 3 stars and I'm very pleased to have read it. The next book I read was Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, Christ's Childhood Pal by Christopher Moore. I have no idea where I saw this recommendation for this book. I don't know if it was on a reading list from a bookstore or if it was from a person, but it is quite a niche book. I saw it in a secondhand bookstore and just grabbed it. The synopsis of this book kind of reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend about how, if you're familiar with the Bible, there is just this huge gap in the years of Jesus Christ where he is last seen as a young boy in a temple, and then next thing you know, he's 30 years old, getting baptized. And there's this huge gap in between that that the Bible doesn't address those years in Jesus' life. And so Christopher Moore has taken it upon himself to create a fictionalized version of Jesus during that time from the perspective of his best pal, Biff. So in this book, Biff is resurrected from the dead and he is holed up in a hotel room with an angel, and he has been tasked with writing his gospel of Jesus to fill in this gap in Jesus' life. First off, Biff tells us that his best friend, Jesus, was known as Josh back in the day. And Biff is fully aware that he is the Messiah. A lot of people know that, but they are very cautious who they tell that to. And Josh is starting to try and understand what that means to be the Messiah. So when Josh decides to track down the 3 wise men who are at his birth, Biff tags along. Biff knows that he has to keep him safe in the big bad world, and so he is the only one who is alongside Josh in these formative years. I think the concept is really interesting. I think it's really quite funny, but I got a little bit tired of the comedic jokes, these zingers that constantly came out from Biff in particular. They just started to feel like they were following the same formula. So I got a little bit tired of that, maybe a third of the way through. It also could have been a lot shorter, I think. There are so many things that happen, but there's a lot of lulls around as well. But Christopher Moore, who I think is an atheist, really does bring a lot of tenderness to it as well. Like there are moments when Josh, the things that he says are like, yeah, I could totally see Jesus saying that. But it is quite blasphemous. Yes, it is quite a niche book. Am I glad I finished it? Yes. Would I feel that I was missing out on something if I hadn't read it? No. Just the synopsis and the idea of a guy named Biff, who is Jesus's best pal while he is, from like a teenager through until the time he starts his missionary work. I feel like I've got that. So I gave it 3 stars. Another niche book that I read this month was Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking. I have not read Joan Didion previously, and I did have this on my bookshelf, and I just felt like now was the right time to pick it up. This is an incredibly niche book because it is exploring a personal journey of grief of Joan when her husband suddenly dies. It's December 30th, and Joan and her husband John are sitting down for dinner after a really harrowing time watching their daughter being put onto life support. She's a woman, she's married. She went into hospital thinking that she might have had a bad variant of the flu, and then next thing she was on life support. So they've just come home, sitting down to dinner. John has a heart attack. And the entire book is the year following that and how Joan processes it, how she reconciles with it. There is like a bit of a stream of consciousness about it. And it's not one of those books that gives you everything all the time, but you'll be reading it and bam, something she says, something she feels just resounds with you and makes sense, especially if you have dealt with grief on a personal level. I think it is really powerful because she's giving words to something that is so personal when you're going through the grieving process. It's incredibly personal, but it is a universal experience. Everyone goes through this at some point. I found this book relatable and also not relatable. There were moments of poignancy and then it wasn't poignant. But Joan Didion has a kind of way of looking at things from a different angle. It's like she has this slanted perspective that you or I both see the same thing, but she comes at it from a different angle and she puts words to it that maybe we weren't able to. And I found that really interesting. I think some people feel that this book gets a bit lost at times where Joan moves on to other things. There's a lot of name dropping in this book, and I feel like some people feel like there was too much of that, but you need those moments of relief when you're talking about such grief. So I enjoyed the book overall. And my recommendation would be that if you have any desire to learn about the grieving process, then this is a really good book for you to read. While it is from Joan's perspective of her husband passing, I think no matter who you are and who you've lost, I think this will help you put some perspective on it. Something very different that I read was The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. This is unlike anything I've ever read before, and this was really a highlight of the month for me. I've had this on my TBR for probably a year. It was only released in 2024, so I must have bought it straight after when it came out. It's been on my shelf for almost a year and I haven't read it. And after reading Joan Didion, I needed something very, very different, so I picked this one up. And it is speculative fiction and it's a debut novel. So bear with me as I share some facts about this book, which none of this is spoilers. I try to stay away from all spoilers when I'm telling you about books, but this is just the premise of the story. So the novel is set in an unnamed town. My estimate is that we're in Canada or Europe because there is a lot of French influence on names and landmarks, and there is a timelessness about this location. It's not dystopian, but simpler. And the town is neighboured by its own past and present versions to the east and the west. So across the valley and over the mountains, to the east is the same town with the same inhabitants 20 years in the future, and to the west, over the mountains, is a town that is 20 years in the past. Each of those towns have the same towns neighbouring themselves as well, with past and present futures of their own. So in this world, people are not free to just visit these towns. There is quite a strict control around who can visit, but you can visit the town 20 years in the future or 20 years in the past. You make a submission to a council and they decide whether or not you should be able to travel. And usually these things are what they call mourning tours. So maybe someone has passed away in your present and you want to go back in time to be able to see them and just experience a moment seeing them again. But the borders are really heavily guarded and it is not everyone that is allowed to have permission to travel to the other towns. So our protagonist is Odile, who is 16 years old, and she and her classmates are at a point in their life where they're starting to have a think about what careers they want. Some people seem to go into a career that their family have, like maybe they're bakers or winemakers, but Odile has aspirations of being a counsellor. That is one of those people who make the decision whether or not someone is allowed to cross the border and go into the neighbouring towns. But things change for Odile when she realises that she recognises some visitors that have clearly come from the future and that they are the parents of a friend of hers, Edme. She's not supposed to have seen them. Everyone that comes in is heavily disguised, but when she does see them, she realises that means that Edme is going to die. Odile is sworn to secrecy. She's not allowed to share this with anybody because it could put in jeopardy the timeline she is in and therefore affect the future and all the other towns. It's really such a fascinating concept, really, really interesting, and it is not hard to get your head around this world building once you're in it. And I was caught up in this dilemma Odile had, which was being friends with Edme but knowing he was going to die. She's a very pragmatic person, very matter of fact, and it is really well paced in my opinion. I found the concept fascinating. I really wanted to know what was coming next. It was a page turner. And the only thing I was distracted by is the fact that there is no quotes in this book. There is no quotation for dialogue, which I struggled with because you would start reading a sentence and there would be a mix of dialogue, spoken dialogue and inner dialogue, and It was quite confusing that I would have to read quite a few times to understand, wait, was that something that she said or just something that she thought? And then I don't understand the concept of that. But I will forgive Howard because overall the story is brilliant, engaging, the writing is really evocative, it really does take you there. And I think part of the magic of this book is that Howard doesn't get into the weeds of why the town is the way it is. He doesn't try and give you too much information of how this has happened. I mean, I don't even know what's happening north and south in this place. What's going on there? But he doesn't get into the weeds of it, which allows you to just focus on the narrative, the story and the characters. And it is what it is, and he doesn't get caught up. If you like coming-of-age stories that are character-driven and have a dystopian or speculative fiction slant, you would love this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the last book I read in May was Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. This was a book I was saving because it was on a number of prize lists, long lists, but I was also being told by people and what I was reading that it was going to be a book that I was going to love. It has these elements of nature writing, and I finally got to it at the end of the month. So this is a memoir. It starts in early 2021 during the pandemic and lockdowns are happening in England, and Dalton stumbles across a baby hare or a leveret, and she has to make a decision whether she leaves it there to potentially perish or takes it home to try and help it through. It is newborn. It is just hours old. So she brings it home and then she realizes how impossible it is to raise a hare. There is no real information on these animals. They are quite different to our domesticated rabbits. And she realizes that this is going to be a real challenge because most hares that are brought into captivity will die from starvation or shock. So this memoir is her documentation of her trial and error approach in raising this hare while still trying to keep a distance from it to allow it to be wild and do what it needs to do without her interfering, because she will release it into the wild at some point. But instead it becomes her constant companion, and even though she keeps it at an arm's length, she doesn't even give the hare a name. And once it's grown, it will leave and it will go into the fields during the night, and then it will come back to her during the day and sleep in the house. I have to say that while I did enjoy this book, it started to wane a little bit for me. It did have those elements I want from a British writer. You know, the writing is beautiful. I always have to keep a dictionary nearby when I'm reading some English or British writers. And I enjoyed reading a little bit about the history of the hare, how prolific it is in the United Kingdom and Europe, but not a lot is known about them as a species compared to other animals. There's some really beautiful nature writing, and understandably, Dalton becomes quite focused on the environmental impact that humans are having in the area with mass agriculture. And that's completely understandable because this hare that she's becoming attached to is going to be living in these areas where they are farming. She does share what she learned about hares and how living in tandem with a hare changed her life and built her appreciation for the natural world. But I felt like there was something missing. I felt like I wanted more from Dalton. I think maybe I went into this expecting a bit of a H is for Hawk or a graft book where we get the information about the animal, but we also have the author going through something quite transformational. And I think she tells you that she did, but I felt like there needed to be more of an account in there of it. It was like Dalton kept herself at arm's length from the hare, but also kept herself at arm's length from us. So I kind of wanted more. I see it more as like a really beautiful meditation, and it has some beautiful illustrations, and I really hope that she writes more because her writing is beautiful. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I think it is a lovely little book, but I just feel like there was something missing for me. So there we go. Those are the books that I read through May. It is truly a mixed bag, and I think if I had to choose a favourite from the month, it would probably be The Other Valley. I think it would be The Other Valley. That was really something that, it was a truly escapist read, and I could not wait to get back to that book when I started reading it. So probably The Other Valley was a highlight for me. But I'm glad I read all of these books. There is no regrets in here. I did share with you in my bookish chat that I was talking about maybe doing like a buddy read, or I'm not even sure. What is the difference between a buddy read and a read along? Either way, we're going to do something come July. I am trying to think of a good book for us to do as a buddy read or a read along, something we can experience together. So that is coming. I'll probably share that with you in a couple of weeks, so you've still got a fortnight or so to find a book to be able to read along with us, which is going to be a lot of fun. So in the meantime, please let me know below what your favourite book from your reading in May was. I would love to hear that, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye.